and welcome back to the Editorial, TLDR's podcast where we discuss everything that we get wrong. Today I'm joined by acting editor-in-chief Rory Taylor.
Hello.
Is he still acting?
I feel like
And returning editor-in-chief Zach Michaelis.
So I am now acting.
Yes.
That was a very brief transition period just
But
there.
it happened.
Okay, good.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
For those of you who aren't aware, Zach was temporarily away because of the birth of his child. Congratulations.
I don't know if a fist bump is the correct way
I
of expressing
don't feel like it is.
No.
You're the father, though. I don't want to tell you what to do.
Yeah.
Temporarily, Rory stood in as the editor-in-chief. So he is here because most of the videos being discussed today are ones from under his tenure. Zach is here purely to berate his predecessor. Before we get into that, how is the child, Zach? All good?
Oh, yeah. I think there aren't really words to. There aren't really words to describe it. I mean, it is just like the best thing that's probably happened to me ever. But you don't want to get too soppy on a TLDR podcast. But yeah, no, it is. And the child has been very well behaved, which helps as well.
Amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
The most emotional things have been said on a TLDR podcast. Definitely.
Yeah, probably not a
The
high
biggest
bar,
achievement.
There you go.
Yeah.
We could put. She's called Margot. We could put her on the world leader leaderboard. That'd be fun. She like sleeps well. She goes up a
I
place.
like that. We should do that.
No, it has actually been earth-shatteringly amazing.
Wow.
Yeah, you should all do it. I mean, there are limitations, but you should all do it if you can. It's great fun, and we can solve that fertility crisis we keep on wangling on about. So.
I've got silver play buttons. That's enough of an achievement. I don't need children. So let's get into it. Where do you want to start? Which channels we made the most mistakes on, Rory?
We'll start with global. That's got the most videos below the threshold, which is about 96.5% like threshold is what we go for. Anything below that is what we talk about. We've got 6 videos from global. Some of them pretty easy to explain, I think. Others maybe require a little bit more explanation. So just going from, I think this is about a month's worth of content.
Yeah, which is slightly longer than normal.
Yeah, which explains why there might be more videos.
Oh, I see. Okay, yes.
Yeah, so
it's not just your tenure.
Yes. First on the list, I think this one was actually under you, Zach.
Yeah, I wrote that one.
This is Can the Democrats replace Biden? Got 95.8% like percentage, which isn't actually
not terrible.
That much lower than the threshold. Do you want to talk about that one?
I don't. So long ago.
Yeah.
Time moves at such an odd pace at the moment that I can't remember what happened. I think part of it's just that obviously, it's a slightly controversial partisan topic. The idea that Biden is too old, which is what we're talking about quite a lot in that video.
Yeah.
We're talking about it when we talk about it. We're mainly talking about what the American public thinks, and the American public does overwhelmingly think Biden is just too old. So we're not necessarily endorsing that point of view, but nonetheless, you can see how some viewers might resist that idea. There you go.
Yeah, and actually, I'm going to skip to one that sort of is a counterbalance to that, which is the Could Trump Be President from Prison one, which got 96.2% likes.
Barely under.
Yeah, which, I mean, a similar thing where it's very, it was Trump in an orange jumpsuit. Here's what happens if/when he is convicted and jailed. It is quite far in the future, but we're answering questions that I think a lot of people do have, and it's quite an unprecedented situation, so I think it's definitely worth covering. But yeah, slightly more people than usual felt the need to dislike it. So.
I think Trump is just a controversial topic, isn't he?
Yeah. So more controversial than that was the Democracy in Decline video, which got 92.6%. I think there are a few different forms of criticism in the comments, but the main one that I think people had a problem with was just the use of the Economist Intelligence Unit's Democracy Index. And we mentioned, I think we mentioned in the video that there are lots of different ways to measure democracy. This is just the one we chose for the video. If we were to do a video on how can you measure democracy, we'd look into all the different factors that these different indexes use. We'd critique them and everything, because there are pros and cons to the different ways it's measured. And I think The Economist obviously does put forward quite a specific liberal capitalist interpretation of what democracy is, that some people don't agree with. But I think the main thing with this video is that it was actually about the trend, the decline in democracy. It wasn't just saying, this country is a democracy, this country isn't. And I think that index works fine if you're trying to show a trend, a decline.
Sure.
Do you think that's the Economist's bias? Are they a liberal capitalist? It's a good question.
Yeah, I feel like they might even admit that, right?
Yeah, I don't think the capitalist is necessary. I think it's more free marketeer.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, probably fair.
Yeah. But they're quite similar words. Just trying to defend.
If you're watching The Economist,
yeah,
drop us a comment.
Odds are pretty.
You
low.
unhappy about
Yeah, and there are obviously some people commenting like, "Oh, I can't believe the UK is treated as a democracy. We've got lords and a king," and it's like, come on.
Rory's official stance.
It's a less synthetic
That's not an
tone than
endorsement
usual.
of the system, but I do think, I don't think that's.
You don't think that undermines our
I don't think
democracy?
you could claim we're not a
significantly.
democracy because
Fair.
of that. Anyway,
Can't believe we're taking heat for the Economist.
yeah,
We need to haul them in front of the
Yeah.
editorial. Can we doorstep them outside the office?
probably
in an
could,
impromptu editorial episode.
Another mildly controversial one: could the Gaza war bankrupt Israel? All our Israel-Gaza content has a kind of relatively lower like ratio than other things because it's obviously quite a heated topic. I think maybe in this one in particular, some people might have thought like, why are you focusing on the impact on Israel when obviously Gaza has been devastated by the war, and there is a paragraph in the video that refers to the impact on Gaza. So I hope that sort of balance things out a bit. Yeah, I mean it wasn't too bad, 96.2 for an Israel video.
I think when you're
That's
looking
actually pretty
I was going to
high,
say, when you
yeah,
consider
Israel.
how many people have strong opinions on either side, 96.2% of people thinking you did a good job doesn't feel horrendous.
Yeah,
I was
Yeah.
also back to edit that video and I thought it was really good.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I'm going to throw this one over to you, Jack. World's biggest risk.
Oh yeah.
94.3%.
Did you write that one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow, I didn't even read that.
The
Wow.
only politics video I've written
A rare
in about
foray into actual
24
writing.
months. I don't actually know why that was controversial. What was the issue?
This is based on the Munich Security Conference's risk report. I think some people just kind of thought, it's promoting MSC.
Sure.
And, it wasn't a paid advert. We did go there.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't ask us to make this video, but because we went there, we thought it'd be useful to use our insight from there. And also as a good way to kind of include the interviews and stuff that we had. So some people might not have liked that.
Was there interviews in the video?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't
sort of
know.
towards the end.
Right
I
at the
think, to
end,
be
just
fair.
some optimism.
Yeah.
We counterbalanced the negativity of the report with our clips from MSC where we asked
Yeah.
people like,
Oh, I should watch it. Sound like a vid.
it's a
where
good
you're
one.
optimistic. It was okay. I mean, it wasn't the best video. You're right. It kind of in moments felt like an ad for the MSC
Yeah.
report, which it wasn't. And kind of it was just reading out the report with pretty graphics.
Yeah.
But like, people wouldn't have read the report otherwise. And there was some interesting stuff in there.
Yeah.
It's
So,
like most of our videos as well.
yeah. Don't say that. Don't pull back the curtain that hard.
And I think there would have been some people who probably just didn't agree with the
Sure.
outcome of the report, even though they did their survey and if you don't think climate change is one of the biggest risks, then
Yeah.
you might find the video annoying, I suppose. But not too bad all in all. The last global one is have we reached peak China? 96%, so actually not that low. I'm not 100% sure why that one is slightly lower than usual. It might just be
I think some people felt it was sort of unduly, unfairly anti-China. I actually get that entirely on like the thumb/title perspective, but in terms of the content, I don't think so at all. I think the content actually pretty well balanced. I mean, the headline taken with the video, and I appreciate that it can sometimes look like we're sort of like reaching for clicks when we do a China video, but maybe that is partly true. But one of the reasons I want to do that China video is I think that you have seen a lot of discourse in the aftermath of China's economic crisis about like peak China or like China in decline or that sort of thing. And I think that there's like a half truth to that. I mean, I think the writing's been on the wall for a while now that China can't maintain its sort of historic growth rates. I mean, no country can. That's just the way that economic growth works. You grow really, really fast to begin with, and then exponential growth never lasts forever, and you tail off a little bit. But the mistake, I think, the reason that's only a half truth is that just because sort of headline GDP growth, what we describe as like productive GDP growth, is slowing in China, does not mean that China sort of geopolitical status or even like just its sort of power in broad terms is actually declining. And one of the things I really want to stress, I don't think we did this well enough in the video, but one of the things I really want to stress is that China is in a really good position when it comes to energy, especially green energy. And I think that's a sort of underappreciated element of China's sort of like geopolitical dominance. So I think the content was actually pretty well balanced. It was like, yeah, economy is slowing, but no, this doesn't necessarily mean we've reached peak China.
Yeah.
But I see how if you could have seen that, like it looks sort of slightly out of the blue. It's not tied into any immediate news story. It looks quite anti-China. You might be a bit sort of resistant to what looks like sort of past that video.
Yeah. Shall we move on to
Let's move on to a different channel.
EU? 4 videos on EU to talk about.
Okay.
First one, just slipped under the threshold with 96.4%. This was how, I can't remember if it's how or why, but how the EU failed the Western Balkans. This is from, I think before you went away quite a few weeks ago. So I'm hoping you remember.
I do actually remember. I think this was a really interesting one. I thought this was credit to Naja who wrote this video. I thought this was a really great video. I thought this was a really fascinating video, and it sort of explored how the Western Balkans, which were promised EU accession a long time ago, I think back in 2004 maybe, how their perspective on the EU has changed, and for really understandable reasons. And one of the things that we talk about in the video that I think is really interesting is how many Balkan countries basically feel like the EU has just been really inconsistent in its application of membership criteria vis-a-vis Ukraine. So like the fact that Ukraine is getting in, despite Ukraine has been fast-tracked in, despite the sort of plethora of problems to do with Ukrainian succession. But while at the same time, countries, Montenegro, North Macedonia have been sitting at the gate for years now. And they're going, well, come on, that's a bit unfair. I've been trying my hardest for 15 years now, and just to be stonewalled by Macron, and then all of a sudden you say, yeah, sure, we're going to take in a country with a bigger land mass than basically any other European country and a population of 40 million people. And there's some other stuff we touched on, but I think that the basic criticism there was that some people thought that actually, no, the EU hasn't failed the Western Balkans. The Western Balkans sort of failed the EU in that respect. Like the Western Balkans hasn't made enough progress to merit getting in. The fact that the Western Balkans is still struggling with corruption issues and some of those rule of law concerns, stuff like that. And I take that point. I think there's, it's probably oversimplified to just blame this entirely on what we might see as like the inconsistent application of the EU's membership criteria or just the EU, and that there is a sense in which both sides are at fault to some degree. But I sort of, be sure we don't mention that in the video. We sort of do in passing, and maybe we could have done more of that. But I do think the primary responsibility, the sort of primary shortcomings, are from the EU side. I think one of the reasons that the Balkans have sort of fallen back into sort of like corruption problems and sort of political infighting is partly because the thing that was motivating that progress originally in the late 2000s and early 2010s was the promise of EU accession. I think it was motivating those anti-corruption efforts and all that sort of thing, and the reconciliation between various Balkan countries was the promise of EU accession. Now that has sort of waned or been taken away, then there's little incentive to resolve those conflicts, or there isn't as much as there once was. But yeah, I think that I thought that was a really good video. I think it's a contentious topic in and of itself. It's really nice and well structured.
Another one that pretty close to the threshold is the end of the West, why the EU and the US, or why Europe and the US is falling out.
That was me.
Yeah. I thought it was a very good video. I would have liked it.
Very much.
I should have liked it as
Could have got us out of this situation.
95.9% on that one. Yeah.
I think we know. I don't think there's anything substantial about it. It's just it's a controversial video. Were there any mistakes in it? I think there was one mistake. There was something about, I think maybe we say Trump beat Trump. Was that a different video I'm thinking of? No, that was the...
Could have been the Biden.
That was the Biden.
Yeah.
Can we get rid of Biden? No, I think that's just a controversial topic.
Yeah. You've got sort of two continents that you can...
I can't really remember even what I've said in that video.
Obviously from.
You've had to get it, it's okay.
Yeah, they're falling out because Trump's coming, and I said there were some structural reasons behind the falling out.
Yeah.
Middle East, China, protectionism.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all coming back, it's all flooding back to me. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think there's a huge amount to answer for on.
No,
on that
I
video.
just think that it's a controversial topic, and the idea is quite controversial. I do stand by it. I do think that. Well, I think maybe we probably shouldn't. The half apology I'll make is that I think there's a sense in which we're probably we're pushing an angle, a partisan, or sort of like a take, insofar as we're saying that the relationship is under strain, and maybe we could have been more balanced and said like, oh, some people think this is just a sort of passing fad, and that the relationship was kind of under strain in the past. I don't know. I don't actually think that is partisan. I think that just the truth of the matter is, and this is always a difficult one. This is a difficult question about sort of what is neutrality, what is like the objective truth. But I do think the objective truth is that the relationship is under strain, and I think in many ways it is unprecedented. I mean, to sort of like, I think that the sort of geopolitical frictions between Europe and the US are greater than they've ever been, held together by the Soviet Union for the post-war era, and then sort of like tugged apart more recently. And then I do think that Trump is sort of unprecedented in the threat he presents to that relationship. I mean, previous presidents, Republicans and Democrats alike, have got annoyed at European NATO members for not spending their fair share, but that's not the same as encouraging Putin to invade one of them. And Trump is just a different caliber. He's just not a normal politician, is the main point here, and that's why he represents an extraordinary threat in that sense to the transatlantic relationship.
Similar kind of military theme was the conscription video, why conscription is on the rise in Europe. 96.1%, again, not that much below the threshold.
I added that as well.
Yeah, I think that was one that was made
just before
a few weeks before it actually came out.
It
came out.
It sat in the bank for a while, so we didn't think it would do that well.
And then it did actually do
really well.
Yeah.
I think there were a couple of errors in that. I think one of them seems to be that we implied, I don't know if we said it explicitly, that countries like Norway and Denmark, no, it was Finland. Well, basically, when talking about some of the countries, I think it was Norway and Denmark and maybe Sweden, which are countries where they have selective conscription. We implied that they only do men, but they don't. It's a sort of like unisex process. And then I think there were a couple of map errors showing, because we were talking about basically how different countries change their conscription policies over time. So from 1990, from actually Cold War onwards. And I don't think the maps correctly reflected the territorial boundaries at the time in a couple of those maps.
Yeah,
that is a recurring problem. It's cool to be fair to the animators, that is a difficult one because obviously the world map looks very different in 1980, but you're trying to demonstrate how policies change over time. You've got to be redrawing maps as the slider moves across. But nonetheless, we made a mistake there. We I get to say acknowledge for the first time in months. We acknowledge. We acknowledge
for?
No, we just acknowledge.
Okay.
We just acknowledge.
Okay.
Yeah, we acknowledge.
In general, sure.
And
then finally, on the EU channel, the Can Ukraine Still Win? The kind of big 2 years into the invasion analysis of the situation in Ukraine. Which again you wrote.
I did actually write that. That had a lower one, didn't it? It had
93%.
So I think that I think one of the main things is it's just a symptom of how politicized Ukraine has become as a topic, which just wasn't true for most of the war. It sort of floated above partisan politics in the US and Europe from 2022 and most 2023. But obviously, I think as the Ukraine has struggled more on the battlefield, it's got to this point where more and more people are asking, what's the point of spending more money on this? I think that is the most important sort of political dynamic when it comes to Ukraine, is the fact that the military failures have sort of created more political stress, which deters further military support, which creates more military failures. There's this negative feedback loop going on. And there was a hope, I think, in about 2022, 2023 amongst sort of European politicians that the reverse would be true, is that as the front line stabilized, sort of Ukrainian momentum would become political, not military. So as Ukraine stopped making rapid advances, which was always going to stop at some point, Ukraine would be advancing insofar as it would then be moving towards the EU and then NATO. And there was supposed to be this sort of momentum behind Ukraine that began as military and then became political. But that's not really how things have all panned out. And I think that was always a bit naive in retrospect, in that military failure basically undermines political progress, and the two things sort of have that correlation. I think there's a sense in which maybe people thought we were being too optimistic. We get this accusation a lot on the Ukraine content. I think we do sort of advertise things in a slightly pro-Ukraine angle. That's partly just because maybe that's an element of audience capture. I think that the actual content of the video, though, I wouldn't agree with that. I think the content of the video is pretty true to... I basically would defend the content of the video. I mean, the video does say Russia is on the front foot now, and it is on the front foot for 2024 at least. But it says that this could change by 2025. I think that it really is true that it could change by 2025. People thought we were being sort of I don't think I saw any substantial criticisms there about why it wouldn't change from 2025 onwards. I mean, we're not saying it definitely will. We're saying, contingent on all of these things, it might do. I think basically we probably took fire on that video from both sides. I think there are people who basically thought we were being too pessimistic about Ukraine, saying that, in the same way that Zelensky criticized Zaluzhny for describing it as a stalemate. Some people have resisted that description on the grounds that they think that Ukraine still will dominate and still can make massive advances, which I just think is not likely. That's just the consensus amongst, again, well-versed analysts. And then I think some people thought we were still being too pro-Ukraine and saying that the idea that Ukraine can sort of recover 2025 isn't feasible, but I think that is misplaced. I think especially, we probably should have made more of this in the video, but so much here obviously hinges on 2024. I think Trump's actual Ukraine policy is unclear for reasons we talked about in other podcasts. When he was asked about what his Ukraine policy would be, he said he'd negotiate a peace deal in 24 hours or whatever it was. But then when the interviewer asked him, but if that doesn't happen, what do you do? He said he'd give Ukraine, I think the quote is, the biggest weapons. So, make of that what you will. It's very hard to infer anything reliable there. But then, if you can imagine, if Biden wins in 2024, Russia's strategic calculus looks very different. From Putin's perspective, you're now looking at another 4 years of sustained attritional warfare, of spending 7% of GDP on defense, of sort of pumping tons of money into the economy and sort of hoping and relying on sustained high international oil prices, which is not a guarantee, especially given, now we're really fucking diving into it. I've been talking literally about giraffes and penguins for the past 2 weeks. Sustained high oil prices is not a safe bet at the moment. Oil prices have been lower than most analysts expect, especially given the frictions in the Middle East. Then all of a sudden the strategic calculus does look very, very different. I think the last thing I'd say is that, so I think we're taking flack from people who think we're being too pessimistic about Ukraine, people who think we're too optimistic. I also think, and I think this is fair, people are saying that I actually don't think this is, well, I see where the people are coming from. People saying that we should be talking more about peace and saying, I don't know if people saying will sort of imply that we should be advocating for peace and that the fact that we weren't is a bad thing. People saying that we should be taking the prospect of peace talks more seriously. We don't really advocate for things. That's not really the point of the channel. I see where people are coming from, though. I mean, the fact that the war is now in an attritional phase that is supremely costly and yet very little territory changed hands. I mean, that is just, there's a sort of moral catastrophe implicit in all that. But the idea that peace talks are happening anytime soon is just for the birds. It's just not happening. It doesn't matter how much pressure you put on either side. Zelensky has in the political space domestically to do that. But more pressingly, Putin has no incentive to go to peace talks now unless they involve basically capitulation. He thinks he's on the front foot. He made this very, very explicit. I think at the press conference in December 2023, I didn't include this bit in the script, but he said, I think the quote's on Ukraine is getting freebies, but freebies run out eventually. And that's always been his policy. He thinks he can win an attritional war for obvious reasons. And so the idea that he's going to pull out now is just for the birds. And I don't think that there is any sort of feasible landing ground. There's not a sort of penumbra where we can find peace here. So I think people push back against that, and I just think that's just not our place to advocate for it. And we were so quick and dismissive of the prospect of peace talks because there's no chance of it happening anytime soon.
Okay.
Should we move to
I hope to be proved wrong, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah. Should we move to our final one?
Yeah.
This
UK?
was only one on UK, and it is the lowest percentage of all of them, 92.2%.
When we do it properly.
Yeah, for the Rochdale by-election one, which, as anyone watching can imagine, there's all sorts of reasons why this might be a controversial one. We've talked about this in the office. Ben, who wrote the video, said what he thinks about the like ratio and comments and things. So try and address the specific things in the video that some people in the comments took issue with. Firstly, there was this description of George Galloway being fired from Talk TV for, I think the script just says, for anti-Semitic tweets. I think Ben said himself that he thinks he should have phrased it as for what Talk TV described as anti-Semitic tweets. I don't actually know the exact context of those tweets. I'm not going to go into it now, but that's what Ben says. I think he acknowledges that maybe that
you
word
could
should
argue
have been
it wasn't
slightly
anti-Semitic, but that was the reason.
Yes. On a similar front, there was this bit about the Green Party candidate who got in a bit of trouble for what the script calls alleged Islamophobia relating to decade-old tweets. The reason it was described as alleged Islamophobia was because the candidate had deleted their Twitter or made it private, so all we had to go by was these screenshots of tweets that we couldn't verify. So unfortunately there was a bit of a miscommunication between writer and animator where basically we didn't want to show those screenshots on screen because we couldn't verify them, but they ended up making it into the video. So we were describing it as alleged Islamophobia
because we hadn't
because we
verified
hadn't
the tweets.
verified, but
And
when you
yet the
see
tweets
it
are on
up-
screen,
yeah.
so
So it sort of comes across like you're slightly minimizing what those possible real or fake tweets said.
yeah.
And when you compare that to the describing George Galloway's tweets, you know, it looks like a bit of
there's
double standard. So those were things people took a bit of issue with. I think the wider thing of the video as well that was always a difficult one for this topic is that it was a video about the Rochdale by-election. It wasn't a big "who is George Galloway" kind of video, because there's so many things you could say about him. You kind of
We didn't even use the cat clip.
exactly, yeah, and there's great chance to put it in now.
Yeah, put the cat
Finally.
clip in now.
Good girl. Now lick your lips. I've got cream all over your whiskers.
I bumped into him once. Did I
Did you?
Did you?
Yeah, and I said, "Are you George Galloway?" And the first thing he asked me is, "Are you Palestinian?"
Wow.
there you go.
Yeah.
Why?
He used to own a hat shop on Goldbourne Road.
He likes his hats.
Does
maybe
like
a
his
clothes,
hats.
just like a clothes shop.
Yeah.
No, I had to disappoint him. I was not Palestinian. I am not Palestinian.
Okay, still.
No,
Thanks
still
for
not.
clarifying.
Yeah. But I think so that was a difficult thing where you're trying to get across in a short part of the script why George Galloway is a controversial person,
Yeah.
how it relates to the by-election, but because of the fact it's not a video entirely about George Galloway, there are things you have to not include, and yeah, it's a difficult one. So yeah, I think that was generally people's issue with it. I also think so that came out Saturday morning, having been kind of written Friday morning, animated across Friday. By the end of Friday, the kind of discourse about the by-election had completely changed because Rishi Sunak made his little speech. There's a lot more to talk about that obviously didn't make it into the video, so maybe people felt that we hadn't fully addressed the wider picture, but that's just a matter of when the video was made versus when it came out. So yeah, I think that those are the main reasons why people took issue with it.
Okay.
I don't know if you have any.
No, I just think it's a shame we didn't have a podcast that week. 'Cause
That
George
would have been
Galloway
the perfect way to
is
discuss
super.
it. Yeah.
Such
Just
a
the by-election
character.
generally.
Yeah. I mean, to his credit, that man is an absolutely phenomenal campaigner. It's amazing that he wins. It is just amazing.
People, we just don't have a political culture where non-mainstream candidates win.
I know.
And he just seems to break that every time he tries it.
It's 4 times, isn't it? He's won 4.
I think so, yeah.
elections as a-
obviously he doesn't then retain the seat, but manages to come back. So yeah, that's
That's
all
the
the
list.
videos. Yeah.
Well, moderate.
All in all, pretty good.
Moderately
I
good,
think.
I'd
Yeah.
say. I don't know what the normal ratio is per week, but considering that's a month worth and a
Yeah.
bunch of like 96 point somethings,
Yeah.
not many total stinkers
And
there.
I think the actual one thing we should all pat ourselves on the back for is the
Go
fact
on.
that in terms of just actual errors, very few.
True.
I think. So I think our systems.
We do have that's
seem to be
true.
working.
I've still been monitoring it, even with the babe. Lucky baby gets to wake up with me and watch TLDR videos. But yeah, I've still been monitoring the error rate, and that really has dropped off. So it's a big namaste to everyone involved.
Yeah.
I've got to stop doing that in public. Let's try that again. So just big thank you to everyone involved, and a special thank you to Rory for taking over the reins.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good fun.
Congrats on your tenure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll come back another day.
You always get promoted on these podcasts, and
Yeah.
you've now been demoted.
Demoted.
Stay now.
I'm not gonna.
Maybe
I'm
Zach
not
will
gonna
have another kid.
challenge your return, but yeah.
Zach might have another kid.
I will have another kid.
Zach will go on holiday, I'm sure.
That's true. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what to add to that.
Thank you for watching. Let us know if any issues you see in future videos. Let us know if you have any issues with what we talked about, and we'll be back in 2 weeks' time. Goodbye.